Hi guys, it's Pete aka on a retro tip and welcome to my top 20 retro driving games. Now I've been working on a few very time consuming videos, so I thought I'd do this one for you in the meantime, as it's a video I've planned to do for a while. I've set myself various rules with this list. It must be retro, so 6th generation or earlier, and you won't be seeing any PS3 or 360 games on the list, like the excellent Blur from Bizarre Creations. I will give a quick shout out to this game though, as it's absolutely amazing, an arcade racer featuring Mario Kart-like power-ups, brilliant fun. Nor will you see any games that have a driving aspect, but driving isn't the sole gameplay, such as the Grand Theft Auto or Driver games. So, time to find out which driving and racing games over the years have become my favourites. First in at number 20 we have Pole Position on the BBC Micro. This was released in 1982 but 1983 in Europe, and it was developed by Namco and published by Atari. Now it may be absolutely shocking by today's standards, but Pole Position holds a special place on the list purely due to the fact that it was one of the first driving games that I ever played. Designed by the same guy who made Pac-Man, Pole Position became 1983's most popular arcade game. It was later brought to home consoles by Atari, including the BBC Micro version which I played. Gameplay, as to be expected from a BBC Micro driving game, is no frills and is comparable to a primitive OutRun. There is no music in game, but the car's engine emits a surprisingly pleasant hum during races. This one's probably only worth checking out if you're a real BBC Micro fan. At number 19 we have Quarantine for DOS, released in 1994, developed by Image Excel and published by GameTech. Now Quarantine is a sort of a cross between a driving game and a first-person shooter, and came at a time when first-person shooters were all the rage on DOS PCs, following the huge success of id Software's 1993 hit Doom. Set in a bleak post-apocalyptic future, the player drives a hover taxi and must pick up and drop off passengers while killing enemies encountered en route. I played this game a lot, and it was in a way a precursor to Carmageddon, which came 3 years later, and garnered similar controversy due to its violent content. I had the CD version, which featured a great soundtrack, and I remember often playing the tracks on my CD player when not playing the game. Quarantine is an often overlooked DOS classic, and definitely worth checking out on DOSBox. At number 18 is Crash Team Racing on the PlayStation, released in 1999. This one was developed by Naughty Dog and published by Sony. The Crash Team Racing isn't my favourite kart racer, but it's certainly a very good one, and perhaps the best that the PlayStation had to offer. It came rather late in the console's life, so I didn't own it back in the day, which is a shame. The game features a good mix of game modes to keep you busy, and a respectable roster of 15 playable characters, some of which must be unlocked before being available. Gameplay is standard kart racer fare, featuring the usual pickups which can be gathered from crates along the tracks. Multiplayer is great fun, especially with a multi-tap allowing for 4 players, and the gameplay and graphics are top notch. As with most Naughty Dog titles, this is a must-have for PlayStation owners. At number 17 is Destruction Derby, again on the PlayStation, released in 1995, developed by Reflections and published by Psygnosis. Destruction Derby was a relatively early release for the PlayStation and a hugely popular one. Gameplay, as the name suggests, revolves around Demolition Derby. Several game modes are available, including Demolition Derbies, races, and also hybrids of the two. The physics were superb for the time, which made for a relatively authentic Demolition Derby experience, and I think that was the game's main appeal. No doubt one that most PlayStation owners have played, but worth picking up if you haven't. Number 16 is 4D Sports Driving, aka Stunts, on DOS and Amiga, released in 1990. This was developed by Distinctive Software and published by Broderbund, although by Mindscape in the UK. Now Stunts was brought to DOS originally and then ported to Amiga, but when Mindscape published the game in Europe, the title was changed to 4D Sports Driving to fit in with their 4D Sports range of games. This was great fun, mainly due to the excellent track editor. The aim of 4D Sports Driving is simple: complete the track in the best time possible or race one of several opponents to the finish line. What made that more challenging was that there were several different obstacles to navigate on the track, such as jumps, loops and corkscrews. There was some nice variety too, with several different vehicles to choose from, and different track surfaces had varying levels of traction. The game had some decent 3D graphics for the time, bearing in mind that this was 1990, and an excellent replay feature. And it was good fun, but where it really excelled was with the track editor. I must have spent countless weekends as a kid building and testing all manner of crazy tracks, and so I have very fond memories of this game. Number 15 is one that everybody will be familiar with, and that's OutRun at the arcade, released in 1986, developed by Sega AM2 and published by Sega. As one of the games on this list that needs no introduction, OutRun was developed by Sega's legendary AM2 team and was designed by the equally well regarded Yu Suzuki. OutRun's a relatively primitive driving game by today's standards, with the player controlling a Ferrari from a rear perspective, but this game was a huge deal back in the 80s. It was commonplace to find an OutRun cab in any arcade in the late 80s and early 90s, be it the upright version or the more appealing sit-down cabinet, and I was always drawn to it as a kid. It's just good, clean, pick up and play gameplay, I suppose, and that's what an arcade game should be. And what a soundtrack, absolutely superb. There have been numerous ports of the game over the years and many sequels, but none capture my attention quite like the original. At 14 is another Sega arcade game, Sega Rally Championship, released in 1994 and published and developed by Sega. Another of Sega's iconic arcade races, Sega Rally was another cab that I was instantly drawn to at arcades. While I do enjoy the Saturn port, nothing beats playing on the huge two-seater arcade cab. In fact, the pub in which I was first a regular back in 1996 had one, so I'd play it pretty much every Friday night when I was 15, while enjoying a few beers. Good times. I'm a massive fan of arcade style races, and particularly rally games, so Sega Rally ticked all the right boxes for me. Another superb pick up and play driving game that's especially enjoyable when racing against a friend. 13th on the list is Carmageddon, released for Windows in 1997, developed by Stainless Games and published by SCI. Although many of its reviewers said it was absolute dogshit, I absolutely loved Carmageddon. Tamed by today's standards in terms of graphic violence, it caused quite the stir back in 1997. This is due to the player being able to run over pedestrians, causing them to splatter gorily all over the car and the road. Levels could be completed by killing all the pedestrians, wrecking all the opponent's cars, or by simply completing the race in the normal fashion, but who the hell was doing that? It's essentially a Destruction Derby-esque banger race set in the future, if that makes sense. I was quite the metal fan back in the mid-90s, so Carmageddon's soundtrack by Fear Factory really appealed to me. In fact, the whole vibe of the game was really appealing to me at the time, and I did spend a lot of time with it. I only played the Windows version, so I can't speak for the console ports, and despite its less than warm reception, I thoroughly enjoyed Carmageddon. Number 12 we have SCI, Special Criminal Investigation, otherwise known as Chase HQ 2, Special Criminal Investigation, released for arcade and Amiga, and it was arcade release in 1989, and the Amiga version came in 1991, and it was developed and published by Taito. SCI is the sequel to Chase HQ, and the gameplay is very similar to the first game, basically a more advanced version of OutRun. The player is a police officer who must chase down criminals who at the start of a level would be a significant distance away. Catching the criminal is achieved by driving fast enough and avoiding crashes, and also from taking the correct path when the road forks, as some routes are faster than others. Once you've caught up with the criminal's vehicle, you must ram them a certain number of times to incapacitate their vehicle so that you can arrest them. My first experience of SCI was actually on my Amiga 500, and I subsequently played it at the arcade, which has a fantastic themed cabinet. It has really nice graphics which are beefier and more colourful than both OutRun and SCI's predecessor Chase HQ, and fun gameplay. Definitely one to try if you get the chance. And number 11 is Mashed on PS2 and Xbox, released in 2004, developed by Supersonic Software and published by Empire Interactive. Now, I first played Mashed on my mate's Xbox. We'd go round to his house and chill with a few drinks and play this game multiplayer all night. Absolutely brilliant multiplayer racing, and one of those games that I don't ever recall playing in single player mode actually. A top-down 3D combat racer, it's like a 3D version of Micro Machines with weapons, which isn't surprising seeing as it was also developed by Supersonic Software. Gameplay works in the same way as Micro Machines does, with players lagging behind being eliminated until one gets far enough ahead to earn a point. The player who gains a certain amount of points, I can't remember how many exactly, but it may have been 10, then wins the race. As I said, first played it on Xbox but subsequently picked it up on PS2, and there are no discernible differences in quality, although I will say that the Xbox's 4 controller ports give that version the advantage, so grab that version if you pick it up. Number 10 is Crazy Taxi, released for the arcade and Dreamcast in 1999, developed and published by Sega. Another brilliant arcade game that I first played at home. It was the Dreamcast version of Crazy Taxi that I first experienced. It was early 2000 and I had recently moved out of home for the first time, and my flatmate bought a Dreamcast with several games, Crazy Taxi being one of them, and we played this to death. The premise is different to anything else on the list, as you're a taxi driver and must traverse the city looking for fares. Once a passenger is picked up, you race to the drop-off point before the time runs out. The faster you get to the destination, the higher the fare, with extra cash awarded for performing stunts along the way. Crazy Taxi is a real rush and very addictive, so it keeps you coming back again and again. Plus the soundtrack featuring the likes of The Offspring will get you buzzing. Time to make some crazy money. Number 9 is Burnout III, released for the PS2 in 2004. This was developed by Criterion and published by EA. Now, the Burnout series came out of nowhere in 2001 and made a huge impact on the genre. Burnout is an arcade-style racer with a twist. The roads are full of pedestrian traffic and the player fills their boost meter by driving riskily, for example by performing near misses. More boost means more speed, so the driving gets very exhilarating very quickly. My favourite in the series is definitely Burnout 3 Takedown, which introduced the titular takedowns to the already frantic gameplay. This allowed you to perform takedowns on opponents, thus wrecking their car. This was just the icing on an already thrilling cake. Burnout 3 has a wealth of gameplay modes and challenges. If you own a PS2 or an Xbox and have never played this game, then you're missing out. At number 8 we have FZero on the Super Nintendo. Now this was released in 1990 in Japan, 1991 in North America, but not until 1992 in Europe, and it was developed and published by Nintendo. Now, I remember the first time I played FZero like it was yesterday. I've never really understood fanboys. Sure, I had an Amiga as a kid, but would jump at the chance to try a friend's Atari ST or Amstrad, and even though I had a Mega Drive, I would relish the chance to play on a Super Nintendo for a change. One of those times was when a younger relative came to stay and he brought his SNES along with a copy of FZero. I remember we set it up in my parents' bedroom alongside my Amiga, and FZero just blew me away. In hindsight, the Mega Drive was severely lacking in good driving games, but the SNES had some great little arcade style races. The premise of FZero was great, put simply, a futuristic version of Formula 1, hence the name FZero. It had gorgeous graphics for the time, and the gameplay was fast and fluid thanks to the use of Mode 7. Definitely one of the best 16-bit era racers for me. Number 7 is V-Rally on the PlayStation, released in 1997. Now this was developed by Eden Studios and published by Infogrames, although I believe it was published by EA in North America. So V-Rally was titled differently depending upon the region, with the European version being styled as V-Rally 97 Championship Edition, and as Need for Speed V-Rally in North America, due to EA handling the publishing over there. As I previously mentioned, I'm a huge fan of arcade races, which is evident by the lack of simulation driving games on this list, and particularly rally games, and V-Rally was an absolute belter. What appealed to me about V-Rally over other similar games at the time, such as Colin McRae, was that there was a two-player split screen mode, as opposed to the usual rally format of a single car racing to beat a time. This made it much more enjoyable in my opinion, and I played V-Rally to death in both single and multiplayer. Another PlayStation must-have. Number 6 is Diddy Kong Racing for the N64, released in 1997, developed and published by Rare. Now, my relationship with the N64 is a funny one. I had one back in the day and absolutely loved it, but there are very few N64 games that I actually like. But those I like, I love, and most of them were from Rare. Diddy Kong Racing is one of those games. It's definitely my favourite racer on the system. I even prefer it to Mario Kart 64. As usual, Rare got everything right with this game. The music is excellent, really upbeat and quite catchy. The graphics and gameplay are also exceptional. Unlike most kart races, Diddy Kong Racing actually has an adventure mode with a plot and bosses to take on. Set on an island, the races are split into separate areas with varying weather and terrain, centred around a central hub area, and the player races in one of three vehicle types: karts, planes or hovercrafts. This structure made the single player mode really stand out for me, and enjoyed progressing much more than I normally would in a kart racer due to the story and aspect of exploration. Races include on-track power-ups as is to be expected, and the tracks are well designed with multiple routes to take. Multiplayer is also brilliant, with various game modes including standard racing and 4 battle modes, including a ridiculously fun mode where you have to capture eggs and take them back to your nest. The game also got ported to the Nintendo DS if you're interested in playing it. Diddy Kong Racing is an absolute classic. Only a few games get any screen time on my N64 these days, but this is definitely one of them. Number 5 is Shocks for the PS2, released in 2002, developed and published by EA. Shocks, subtitled Rally Reinvented, is an absolutely fantastic arcade racer and one of my favourite PS2 games. Although it was well received for its gameplay and graphics, it seems that relatively few people actually know about it, which is a crying shame. It's a real gem of the genre, and as I said, I love my arcade racers, particularly rally games, and this is one of the best. Shocks features 24 licensed vehicles and tracks across 3 environments: desert, jungle and ice. An interesting feature was the Shocks zones, which the player races through trying to beat a timer, resulting in either a bronze, silver or gold award being given depending on the time achieved. Shocks lacks in game modes though, having only a championship mode, but it does have a great 4-player split screen multiplayer. It's just pure fast-paced arcade racing, and I think that's its appeal, but it can be quite challenging. Shocks is cheap as chips to pick up for the PS2, so I'd thoroughly recommend grabbing yourself a copy. Number 4 is Wipeout on the PlayStation, released in 1995, developed and published by Psygnosis. Now Wipeout was a launch title for the PlayStation, so it was one of the first games I ever played on the system. It's also another game that I remember playing like it was yesterday, going to my mate's house who had just picked up the console with Tekken, Ridge Racer and Wipeout. As we were used to playing Mega Drive, SNES and Amiga, this was like holy shit, this is the future. It was mind blowing. The graphics are stunning and the racing is really fast. That was seriously impressive in 1995. And the CD based soundtrack was equally as surprising, with electronic music from artists like the Chemical Brothers, Left Field and Orbital. Wipeout is a futuristic racer set in an anti-gravity racing league. There are 8 ships from which to choose, and 7 tracks featuring boosts and power-ups. The physics admittedly aren't the best, so manoeuvring can be a bit tricky sometimes, and this was improved in subsequent versions, but I still have a soft spot for the original. Wipeout of course features a fun multiplayer mode as well, and if you haven't tried Wipeout and have any of Sony's PlayStation consoles, I urge you to give the Wipeout series a try. In at number 3 we have Super Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo, released in 1992 and 1993 in Europe and published and developed by Nintendo. I really struggled ordering this list, and particularly I had trouble with the top 3, but this is what I'm going with. Super Mario Kart is my favourite of the retro games in the series, although I do love Super Circuit on the Game Boy Advance. The Super Mario Kart was one of the reasons to own a SNES back in the day, and was a game that I jumped at the chance to play when I had my Mega Drive before I got hold of SNES. Arguably, Super Mario Kart popularised the kart racing genre. Gameplay is standard kart racing fare with various characters and courses, and power-ups strewn throughout the tracks. Graphics were absolutely stunning, and the music was pretty good too. At its core, Mario Kart is an arcade racer, because the handling works much in the same way as arcade races do. It's just pure, unadulterated fun. The single player mode is decent, with the player racing through various cups, but multiplayer is where the game really shined. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir with this one, as everybody's played Mario Kart with their mates, but if you haven't, stop this video right now and do it! Second on the list is Super Off-Road for the arcade and Amiga, released in 1989. And this is published by the Leyland Corporation and published by Virgin Games. Now, talking of pure unadulterated fun, Super Off-Road is just another shining example. The gameplay is so simple. Drive your truck around the track and try to beat your 3 opponents. It was released for many systems, but I first played it on Amiga and subsequently played it at the arcade on the fantastic 3-player cabinet which features 3 steering wheels, which I was fortunate enough to play on again recently at Arcade Club. Tracks feature a few hazards, jumps, water and oil slicks, and cash and nitros, or boosts, can be collected from around the track, with extra cash awarded for placing from 1st to 3rd. After each race, cash can be spent on nitros or on upgrades for your vehicle, increasing its speed and acceleration, or upgrading its tyres and shock absorbers. And that's it really. It's so simple but just addictively enjoyable. The graphics and music are great, and playing it with friends is always a blast. It's one I still always go back to, be it on my Amiga or on the Bar Top Arcade, and it's still brilliant. So at number 1 we have Micro Machines 2 Turbo Tournament on the Mega Drive, released in 1994, published by Codemasters and developed by Supersonic Software. So yeah, number 1 we have the almighty Micro Machines. There are 4 on the Mega Drive: Micro Machines, Micro Machines 2, Turbo Tournament 96 and Military, but 2 has to be my favourite. This was the first in the series to introduce the awesome J-Kart, allowing for 4 players to play at once. Micro Machines is a top-down racer featuring various miniature vehicles such as cars, boats and helicopters. As I mentioned earlier with Mashed, a player must gain a sufficient lead in the race to get far enough ahead to leave their opponents behind off screen. Once a screen ahead, the player gets a point and the players are reset on the track. Once a certain number of points have been obtained, the race is won. As it's based on the Micro Machines toys, the cars are miniature, so races take place in various household locations, be it on a breakfast table, pool table, in the bath or in the garden. Obstacles are household items themed to the track which must be avoided. Graphics are good for a Mega Drive game, but there is no in-game music. Probably for the best, as you wouldn't hear it over the screams and shouts of your mates anyway. Micro Machines 2 is probably one of the best multiplayer experiences ever made, and I still love playing it with friends over a few beers. So there we have my top 20 retro driving games, guys. Quite a few great games had to be culled from the list, so honourable mentions include Ridge Racer on the PlayStation, which is another early PlayStation release, and a fun fast-paced arcade racer. And Auto Modelista on the PS2, which has a very unique cel-shaded graphical style. I'd love to hear what your favourites are, be it in the comments or in a video response. Thanks for watching!